All right, great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the March 11th, 2021 Flux Dev Meeting. Let's go ahead and get started. So give me just a moment to pull up these docs. So we have, let's see, moderator, I think was me. Okay, cool. If anyone feels like taking notes, please feel free to pop yourself on that list or just do it. And yeah, so we have a list of topics. If you have other topics as we're going, please just pop them at the end. Our first one is a repeating topic. That is a new repeating topic. We're going to be checking in with Michael on how is image update automation looking? And I have to say this just to be clear, the date is TBD. There is no way that we can nail down a date or set expectations. This is mainly just for people who are working on the project, so we can get some sort of a sense of other things that relate to image update automation. So this is more just like, how is it this moment? What do you say, Michael?
Status report. So nothing much has changed in the last while.
Okay.
The big things to overcome or to get past before we can do a GA or whatever the next target is, milestone, are to do with almost sort of philosophical questions about the API. So for instance, at present, the automation needs to access a Git repository and have write permissions to the Git repository to make writes. There is an API type custom resource called the Git repository in the source controller. The image automation makes use of that, but that is not actually necessarily a good thing to do, because it has a whole bunch of fields that are to do with its use as a source that don't necessarily make sense for use as a Git repository to write to. So one design question, let's say, philosophical is probably a bit over-egging it. One design question is it reasonable to keep using it and just ignore some of those fields? Or should there be some common object used that doesn't have those fields? It's kind of too late to do that because the Git repository is already in a beta API, so that would break compatibility. So should image automation just have its own fields for Git repositories and not reuse that thing? So there's like 2 or 3 issues that are like that basically need a bunch of discussion. There already are discussions on GitHub for them, but not much input yet, because nothing is really driving those.
Do you mean having its own CRD that just has some shared fields, but only those that are needed for image automation?
Yes, or in fact, the only thing it really needs is the URL and a reference to the secret. So it could get away with 2 fields in the image automation thing. I've set the options out in the GitHub discussions.
Okay.
So people can look at those. But yeah, or something more like what you said, Scott.
Okay, got it. You happen to have a link handy for the GitHub discussion? I could probably find it.
I will find them and put them in the notes.
Thanks a lot.
So I think that's pretty much. Then there's sort of feature and bugs and stuff trickling in, but those tend to get handled. So I think that's, if anyone wants to ask anything about the status of image automation, I can answer stuff. Otherwise, I'm done with that bit.
I'm not hearing anyone jump in, but if you do, please just stop me or something. Okay, cool. Thanks a lot, Michael. That is awesome for me anyway. Um, so Daniel H wanted Kingdon and or I to discuss the a GitHub project board here briefly. Kingdon, do you feel like giving it, or do you want me to just keep rolling?
This kind of goes with Allison's agenda item, I think, as far as adding a new membership status. Since I think in order to control a project board, you need to have at least some membership status. I'm not sure if we want additional governance around project boards, or if we should add a note that project boards are a free-for-all if they're in free-form mode, or how I'm not really well versed with how project boards work. I've only started to work with them a little bit in Flux v1.
Gotcha.
Can you give
Yeah,
us a bit of background, Kingdon?
Beg pardon?
Can you give us a bit of background?
Sure. So we have some team members at Weaveworks who are involved with lots of aspects of the project, in everything from communications to directing issues and pull requests to triage. And I think that this discussion started as a triage role that might not exactly intersect with the new membership role that Allison proposed, but I think there's a prerequisite that you have to get into the Flux org somehow, so the proposals are related. I don't think we really have a strong governance model around triage role. And I'm not sure that the triage role is the right role to manage. I don't know enough details about how GitHub org works to say that that's exactly how it should be done. But we'd like to have some coordination, and we'd like to do it in the open as transparently as possible. And the GitHub project is fills the bill for that really well, in a way where you can refer to open issues and get links. Lee has your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to, and I'm positive Allison can as well, to how this just works within the Kubernetes project. So similar to Kubernetes and Flux, anybody can create an issue. And it's like, you don't need a lot of access to actuate the actual state of the project board. But if you want the project to cross-cut several repositories, then you need access to create the project inside of the org. So in Kubernetes, like, not just anybody can create a project board, right? But anybody could contribute to the issues and the projects themselves. Does that sound accurate to you, Allison?
That sounds pretty average.
Yeah, that has not proven to be, problematic. Like, I don't know of any cases where somebody was using the project board and there was like vandalism or something. So I would say that our standards for issue creation really probably apply that same openness to just managing the project.
Yeah, makes sense. Also, if I could just chime in, not as moderator here, but just as another member of this group. One of the other part of the context is that one of the other things that would be helpful for those people already on the community team, or otherwise who are already doing similar kind of work, like was just mentioned by several people, right? Communications, organization work, coordination things. Some of those don't require issues or PRs. Some of those could just simply be plain cards on the project board that then could be converted to an issue, but aren't necessarily. Similar to when we have meetings like this and someone needs to remember to do something, in the not too distant past, I have created stub issues for those, which are not really very helpful because they don't have a lot of background context. It's kind of like a TBD to fill this out, you know, and then they just kind of sit there if no one gets around to filling them out. So it's better to have cards that list those notes so any of us can see them. Someone could make an issue from it. Someone with project board access has the ability to make an issue directly from that card. And we can do so only once it gets fleshed out enough to make sense to be an issue or something like that. So that's the other piece of the context that would be nice for those people who are already helping with this. And we do want other people to help with this too. Does that sound right to several of you?
So there's the mechanism, which I understand, and it sounds like the problem is figuring out how this fits with governance.
In terms of governance, yeah, that's right. In terms of governance, I don't think there is, well, there is a process. The process is the members of the organization, the maintainers of the Flux organization, the oversight committee get to decide on how things that don't currently have status have status. So what would happen is this should be, you're doing the right thing, Kingdon, exactly, as or Daniel and all of us or whatever, we're doing the right thing by, and Allison for your proposal that I don't want to steal the thunder of because you're coming up next, but discussing it here is what the governance says, then setting a GitHub discussion if necessary, if there's not already immediate consensus by the governance committee and all members of the governance committee aren't here. So the next thing is to make a GitHub discussion, which people can comment on. And once there's consensus, then do the next steps. If there's not consensus, there's a whole process in the governance doc.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to just have it will probably be a brief discussion, but start a discussion in the GitHub thing, and then we'll figure out how to encode it in, if we need to write it down somewhere, basically, or whether we can just change GitHub permissions. And yeah, sound good?
Super.
So the only thing I kind of want to add as a side thought is it may be beneficial to create a status for outside team, outside org teams. There is a way where you can delegate to a team in an outside org. And when we consider that there may be other organizations besides Weaveworks that would like to contribute in a similar way, that have their own internal communication structure, that don't necessarily want to step on our toes, that might be a thing.
I'm confused. Are you talking about outside of Flux CD org or?
The structure I'm talking about is where you have, like, under Weaveworks, you could have a team and Flux CD delegates someone to that team. So that would be
interesting.
Different.
I didn't know that you could do that in GitHub. It's struggling to imagine how that would be useful in the long term, but maybe it's useful for, yeah. Like we have several Microsoft folks, I guess, who interact with the project directly. I don't know if we have a use
or
for pinging.
TNCF. Maybe CNCF has a kind of media team that might want to. I can kind of see this
that could be useful.
Maybe it's useful in a few.
Since that's like a special relationship that will always be there.
Right, exactly. Allison, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I got a little raised hand emoji. So my thoughts with this whole project board, and we've got a whole bunch of people who would want project boards, but we're not necessarily code maintainers. We're more on the kind of community side of things. So we'll do social where we're like writing marketing updates and all that. I feel like maybe there is a gap in our governance roles where we need to define under maintainers, there is a community manager role, right? And then we can set team community managers in Flux to be able to manage a certain board, right? I don't know. I need a big font.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that relates to like the requests for folks to be able to like triage and label things without having code ownership, or without needing that, right? So
Yeah, and there is precedent for this in other projects, including Helm, for example. This was a relatively recent thing where someone who had been doing community management for a long time, Karen Chu, was only at a certain point officially acknowledged to be that. So hopefully we can learn from that and get this going sooner than later.
yeah, and we've been doing a lot of this stuff like internally and like Weaveworks calls and that kind of thing. Basically just out of necessity, but it would be great, you know, if like somebody from a different company wants to also help with community management, like they want to get involved and benefit from the Flux project, you know, that they feel that there's a path there and that there's like a play or at least people to create structure with. Cool. So it sounds like that's something we should solve. Does anyone?
Let's get those sorts of
solve it?
requirements. Let's get those sorts of requirements into the discussion. So on record.
Yep.
Because without disagreeing with the suggestion of the community manager role, I would like to see, you know, what is needed beyond being able to access, say, the community repo and a project board, or even at the top level, a project board. So if we can figure that out, then we can figure out whether we need it or not.
Yeah, I imagine that this type of person would also be like a docs owner, you know, for related reasons, that kind of thing. So there's a long list of things that I wasn't saying that we should do a specific thing, but just that we need to prioritize solving the thing. This space of there are roles related to triage and communication that are probably underdocumented in our governance.
I agree, and I recognize that there are things that are not well catered for. That I just want to figure out exactly what the things are and whether we can just do it with permissions or whether we need to have more structure around it. And the way to do that is to kind of get all the specifics on record. And so if we put them in, if someone starts a discussion, then we can get them on record there, and then everyone can go through them and digest them. And okay.
Yeah, I moved both of those to action items. So there's a discussion for both of those. But before moving on from this, Allison, is your comment, I know, related? Is it something that you think should fold right into this, or do you want to just, well, in any case, you're up.
I feel like I'll just kind of tackle that comment with my item that I got.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I think we're done with that for the moment, unless anyone has anything else that's super burning that they can't wait to put in the discussion, GitHub discussion. Okay, Allison.
Hello, everyone. I'm Allison. In case you haven't met me before, I'm a developer advocate over at Weaveworks. And so one thing I wanted to bring up is I've made this pull request, and it expands a little bit on the roles within Flux. It gives a little bit more of like permissions flair to people who we identify in our community as contributors. Now, one of my biggest motivations behind this is, as someone who kind of hasn't really interacted that much with the Flux project, when I saw the roles stock myself, I was kind of like, there is a big kind of jump between just kind of being a contributor to being a full-on maintainer, right? And that can feel pretty intimidating to some people, I know. So kind of like to bootstrap people like who have started showing a commitment to wanting to get more involved with the community. I wanted to update the contributor role to show that we're going to give you, we're going to add you to the org, so you can show on your GitHub page that you're a Flux member. But yeah, just kind of all this stuff is really focused on building up a contributor ladder. So not only we kind of capture, I'm going on a ramble here. But this is just kind of like the first step of us kind of expanding our contributor ladder to also like kind of cover the things that we mentioned before. Like we've got people who do docs, we've got people who do community management. So kind of, yeah, I just want to get people's thoughts and feedbacks on some of the points I've put in that. Yeah. So yeah, sorry if that was like a giant bunch of wordage.
Oh, great.
Not at all. So Alison, do you feel that, is it something like, if you have contributed something, you get a label as a contributor, but that's sort of not enough reward and you're still outside? Is that the feeling that's motivating this?
Yeah, kind of like you could have made like a couple PRs, but like you still kind of feel like a little bit maybe like an outsider because you're not like a full-on maintainer. You got the badge, you got all the shiny things. And it's about like kind of giving that like encouragement, incentivizing people slowly stepping through the different roles on our like ladder here. So
yep. And so I guess the difference is between you're outside and you're sort of throwing PRs in versus you are, if you're a member, then you may feel maybe more like part of a team. Is that because that's really the difference, right? Is that if you remember, there's no other difference except that you have the thing saying you're in the org, right?
Yeah, and it gives people who are new something to kind of work towards as well. So like, you know, I'm going to get in a couple contributions, and yeah, and then you could also say, you know, a prerequisite for becoming a maintainer is you've become a contributor and you're already like part of the org. So like after perhaps maybe like say like 3 months of being a maintainer, you showed some sustained contribution or something. A member, if you show some sort of sustained contribution, right, you can kind of step up, right?
Okay. Cool,
this reminds me of something. Sorry, Michael.
Lee, sorry, Hida and
oh, yeah.
I think you might be ahead of Kingdon, but behind Hida.
Cool.
Kingdon's nodding. Okay, Hida.
Thanks, Michael.
You come in.
So you link to the contributor ladder for SIG contributor strategy. I don't know if it applies to the whole Kubernetes organization.
It's just kind of like a draft kind of contributor ladder from the CNCF SIG contributor strategy, which kind of drafts out some roles. I do admit I derived some of the ideas from this doc. I kind of copy kind of some of the Kubernetes stuff, like you can kind of see it's reflected a little bit in there. But I feel the overall goal is we kind of more stuff that I want to tag on.
In the example you link to, is a contributor part of the organization, or is it just a contributor because the person regularly contributes? Because what you want to do basically is assign some sort of rights or additional level of Odin. Assign, yeah, basically give them an org access, but from the contributor ladder you link to, or as an example, someone starts to gain privileges at approver level.
Mm. It's a very rough skeleton and draft, that letter. So like I kind of added just the privilege of being in the org there. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit tricky, isn't it? Because they don't quite line up with how GitHub talks about things, and that probably doesn't line up with how other projects talk about things. So we just have to be a bit careful about when, you know, saying contributor of this kind versus that kind. And that's okay though. We'll figure it out.
So as a recent new member of the Flux team, I feel like this would have been really helpful. I did feel like when I came in to work on Flux V1 with my mandate to close as many issues as possible, that it was a little bit of a mismatch, impedance mismatch. How do I get, you know, if I start from a place where I haven't had really any pull requests merged of my own, and I'm not a member of the org, where do I start? And it was I feel like I just blustered past it a little bit. We voted on it, and I got write access to make my life easier. So this is a much more reasonable structure because write access is pretty big, even if it's not a maintainership role formally.
But that's
like the proposal.
That's the thing with the proposal as it stands now. It doesn't give you any additional rights. It just acknowledges the fact by adding you to the organization, but that doesn't mean that you suddenly can do things within the Flux CD organization. So from a maintainer point of perspective, or from the oversight committee's perspective, it just adds a lot of administration stuff you have to do without really giving something to the person who is contributing besides the shiny badge on your GitHub profile. But other than that, it doesn't really add anything.
I'm gonna pull Leon, who's been waiting patiently for a bit. But I did want to say that Hida, you just mentioned something that it gives people, and that's acknowledgement. Anyway, sorry, Lee.
Yeah. No need to continue on that. I do remember the feeling of being a brand new dev added to my first organization, and then looking at my profile thinking I'm not an imposter anymore. So that's part of it for sure. It's notable that when you become an org member in Kubernetes, there are two systems that you do get access to. So you become an org member of the GitHub org. You also become a member of the Google group. We have the Flux CD Google group, which you're able to just join. I particularly as an organizer of like a SIG or something, when I draft a document and I follow the Kubernetes rules to like open edit access or comment access to like the entire org via the Google group, I know that this is a massive audience of people to be like putting this out onto the internet, because anybody who's interested in using Kubernetes might be interested in looking at this document. Having the group, the Google group, that's tightly coupled with the org membership helps me know that the code of conduct is going to be followed in this Google document. So this is one thing that I think is super important. When you join the org, right, you are a community member and you are subject to having your access to that community revoked if you do not follow the community rules. And then the GitHub org is used to gate access to CI in Pr. So when you become a org member, all of your patches are okay to test. So we don't have this function in Flux right now, I don't believe, anywhere. But that's something where it's like, if you had some more sensitive batch CI infrastructure or something that you wanted to to run and it required some validation, this would unlock that capability, the GitHub org membership.
Right
So-
now, that's gated behind write access to a repo, I think.
Oh, yeah, those are the things that you get immediate access to when you become a Kubernetes org member, right? Your patches no longer need to be validated by an org member because you are an org member. You're trusted to not destroy the project with your patches. You're trusted to follow the community code of conduct, which means you now have edit access to community documents. So, yeah.
So can I just add something there quickly?
Oh, and the label bot. You get access to the prowl commands as well. But yeah, go ahead, Philip.
So it's like we don't really have any secret stuff within the org. There aren't really a lot that's hidden, which is good. So like actions, build pipelines, all that is kind of open. The only thing that might help, at least a bit, might be some sort of system, because right now it's only maintainers who are able to approve PRs. So some sort of, I don't know, maybe not that you're immediately able to like approve PRs, but some sort of like, okay, so yeah, it has gone through some initial check of somebody who's like a trusted member, which makes it easier then to review changes, hopefully.
Yeah, but to make that, oh, Scott, you want to go first?
Only that two very short things. One is since Kubernetes implemented Prowl, GitHub has added a lot of new features. For example, the triage role. That's exactly what Philip was talking about. Such a role can be added to individuals or ideally a team. People can, in order for members to be part of any team, they have to also be part of the org, a GitHub team. There could be multiple levels of teams who gain certain levels of trust based on certain actions and who are expected to maintain certain things, just as Lee was mentioning, in order to retain that team status. That definitely would have to be added to our governance, because that has to do with how, membership is part of governance. So Allison, I'll definitely comment on that PR, and maybe what we can do, I don't want to shut down any other discussion, but I just want to encourage people to not just limit the ideas you have right now to this chat, and also bring this into the PR too. That's it for me. Did Hida want to say something? I know Michael just wait. Oh, thumbs up. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I will just comment on the PR with any further questions I have.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Allison. That is awesome. Did you want to say other things, Allison, about that?
I think we've covered everything. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. All right, then. Thanks, Allison. Kingdon?
Thanks. So there is a pull request that's linked to in the document called the Omnibus Pr. This has been my strategy. I'm linking to it in the chat here to help fulfill my central role here, which is to not add additional maintenance burden to the existing maintainers while I sort of shore up the pull requests and issue reports that have piled up in Flux v1 repo. So it's approaching readiness for a release. I wouldn't say it has 100% of what I want in it yet. There's one in particular that's not, that's outstanding. And if you are really interested in this, you can come and find in the Flux issues and PRs report, you can sort by recently updated to find where the discussions are ongoing in the open list. But if you are a maintainer and you want to give your thumbs up or thumbs down, this is one place you can go and add a review for many things at once. And it's organized as neatly as I can so that if you want to go down the list one after another of what actually is planned to be included in the next release and give a thumbs up one at a time, you could do that too.
Cool. I think there's a couple of things that need my attention there, so I'll try and have a look at those, Kingdon.
I put two at your attention, yes. Thanks. That help could come from any maintainer. It's just because I think those issues were ones that you originally opened, so I wanted to direct them at you.
Yep, makes sense.
Thanks.
Okay, cool. Stacy, you're still here.
I am, for a change. So thanks for covering for me the last couple times that I've had to drop off. Just to quickly mention, we have some upcoming talks scheduled, and the talk that Lee gave on migrating from V1 to V2 is up and can be viewed now for replay. So I just wanted to mention that. And then Scott's doing GitOps patterns for Helm on the 22nd. We're doing Flux V2 on Azure with Lee on the 5th. And then Allison's taking on setting up notifications, alerts, and webhooks on the 19th. That is it for me. Thanks.
Allison, is that going to be your first WOOG on? Awesome.
Yep.
Cool. Very cool.
Cool. And one fun note, since there are other people that I'm collaborating with on devising these patterns for users who want to use only Helm, notably Hida and possibly Lee. I think we have been talking about looking at some of that together. But anyway, we'll acknowledge everyone fully, or I will when I get that talk. Okay. Oh, look at me! Look at it! It's me. Me. So this other topic I just wanted to bring up briefly is that there has been conversation or presentations in the past of a public timetable for Flux migration and support for the different versions for Flux 1 and Flux 2. I remember the last public meeting we had about this, where the topic was raised. One of my action items was to split a column out into separating the CLI and the SDK, or rather the GitOps toolkit, because they have different versioning schemes, and so that is there now. No one really needs to do much for that PR because it is it's approved and ready to go as soon as I squash and force push that. Yes, please. Thanks, kiddo. The only thing I want to I wanted to bring it up for two reasons. One is check it out, yo. So anyone that wants to know kind of what the current status is, this is from Flux maintainers of each component. This is not something that I'm stating. This is a long, arduous process, kind of deciding really what can be dated, what are the phase commitments, and what are the dates. And you'll see a number of those dates are TBD because they just have to be. But that's why during these calls, we're going to do check-ins like we did at the beginning of this one about image update automation, for example, and other things, because that's required for the next milestone. So the only other, so the second reason is because I don't want to open up Pandora's box here, but if there are, I would like to just briefly ask about the process of squashing, of asking a PR submitter to squash and then force push their commits. I believe this might be a question for you, Hida, but others as well. I believe that's a bit of a barrier. I don't mind doing it. It has two downsides. One is when that's done, then context of when commits happen versus comments can sometimes become lost. in GitHub because they're not really part of Git. They're tied to commit SHAs and so on. Then you ultimately lose the context of that former discussion. And two, GitHub at some point in the, well, I guess it was sort of the distant past now, but at some point added the squash and merge option for repos if we do enable it, which allows a PR to maintain all of its comments and discussions and the credits and the co-authorship and so on of specific commits for posterity, while also adding doing that automatically. So I just wanted to raise that briefly, and that's it. We can continue it elsewhere, but if again, I'm sort of pointing at you. Well, I said Hida, but I meant Hida and Michael mainly as maintainers of the Flux CD project, but also others if you have thoughts.
So on the, I apologize, I had to go and get my charger, so I missed the first part of that bit.
Oh.
I think, but what I understand is part of the question is how to deal with Git history in PRs. And Flux, I think, probably historically follows my preference, which is less about recording what happened and more about recording a coherent set of changes. So whenever I do Git history for myself, I usually rewrite it so that someone can follow along later on, come along later on and then see, oh yes, this makes sense as a change. And now I see how this adds to that and so on and so forth, right? So it is about seeing why something happened and kind of, tidying it up so that's really, really clear and you can learn from what happened. And GitHub still keeps all the comments about, it's just that they might refer to things that got garbage collected, but you can at least see them. So yeah, that's why it's tilted that way, let's say.
Correct. And what do you think about GitHub's introduction of the squash and merge option for maintainers so that you can have the best of both worlds? I know there's a downside of that too for some folks, but I'm just curious where you stand with that, Michael.
I'll give my opinion very briefly, and then Hida and Kingdon can come in. I think it was Kingdon. You had your hand up. No. My opinion is that I think it lets people off the hook, and it means you don't actually end up with a nice. Sometimes you do actually want to see those individual commits in the history, but it's much more of a. You could say it's a taste thing because you can still go look at the branch, I guess, if you want the exact commit history. Yeah.
Oh, well,
it is shaking his head, so maybe he disagrees on that.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Can I go, Kingdon? Or do you want to talk? Okay. So the problem with GitHub squash and merge is that it isn't a squash and merge. What happens is that the end state of your branch gets appended to the branch you're merging into. So the whole context of where it comes from, besides the PR number that will be recorded in the commit message, there is no reference in Git itself towards the branch it originates from. So it creates a whole new problem because then your information is separated or is split between Git and GitHub, because GitHub has all the information about the pull request, and your Git information has only references to whatever is on GitHub. So that's why for me it is an option, because you create a bigger problem.
I personally find that the Git interactive rebase is a really helpful sort of retrospective time. If I've made a lot of commits, especially for me to go back and see how much of this is really important for the next reviewer. Let's say someone is going to come along and review this PR after it's been merged and they want to know what happened in it. There is so much information that is really helpful to know, especially what was finally merged. But in between there's usually less helpful information, and the potential for merge conflicts later when someone drags their commit across yours in a pull rebase is much greater if you don't squash and merge, or if you don't manually squash rebase. And it's not strictly necessary, I think, if you've signed off every single commit already, but I also prefer to save the sign off for the end, and I like to append it in a amendment once I'm sure that this commit is ready for publication. It's a review step. So like Michael said, letting you off the hook is kind of similar to my feelings about it.
It's all about respect, isn't it? Respect for the reviewer. Kevin, I think you might be next.
So one of the things I've had to deal with this a lot, and people don't like it. They don't like having to squash their commits and things. And the way I usually express it to them is that commits are forever, and so commit messages are forever. And if you have this long litany of commits, and you then require someone else to squash merge them and kind of make them into something sensible, then you're kind of putting the onus on to someone that probably thinks negatively of you, to be honest, when that happens. So if you think about what you want to commit and to give that as your forever message about the description of the change you've just made, that's the way to kind of consider it. And rather than a whole series of commits with, yourself, you get like review comment commits and changes from review and things like that. See it as here's the work that I'm actually adding to this project.
Yeah, really good point. And even if you don't intend to, even if you're not being kind of lazy, like quite often on a feature branch or whatever, I will go down one particular implementation, then back out and just change it all, right? And there's no reason for anyone to look at that dead end. I may as well just rebase it out and save their time.
I guess I'll go next. The reason I brought this up, just to be clear, is not because I don't enjoy commit grouping and tidying. I think it's very valuable. It's more, as you said, it's posterity for yourself. If you use the, I think Hida mentioned the only downside that I've heard of enabling the squash and commit option, which is that there is no recording of this branch came from this was merged from this branch on this fork, etc. It really is another golden handcuffs to GitHub. That is definitely true. That's the only downside I'm aware of. All of the things that several folks mentioned about the upsides of tidying your commit groups, whether it's one commit or several sensible ones, instead of just a long litany of typos and etc. This does not preclude people from doing that. The reason that I mentioned this is because one of our goals is to continue to open up the project to a wide contributor base, and that's, of course, the code quality is super important. There are some absolute requirements, for example, DCO, in terms of licensing. But apart from that, I wondered if perhaps asking people to squash all of their commits all the time is not a barrier to entry. That's it. But maybe at this point, I should open up a quick discussion about it, and then we can list some of the things that were said during this chat. Does that sound like a good way forward?
Is there something we need to change? Is that?
Yeah, not need to, but if that is a shared thought, it may not be that this could be a barrier to entry, or that we want a barrier to entry because, people really should think about squashing their commits and should get really into that, etc. Then, if it's the case that we do want to open that a bit to allow this to just be an automated thing as well, then yeah, we would have to enable the squash and commit option in the GitHub settings for the project in question. That's it. And not tell people, okay, it's approved, now go ahead and squash everything together. That's the only difference it would be. So.
I think it would be better to teach people to properly use Git.
I was
even
gonna
if
say,
it's using a bot or whatever. I mean, you
We're
already
in-
see people creating commits with like commit messages longer than 72 characters in the first commit line. You see people creating fixed commits instead of doing an interactive rebase. Those are all tricks you can learn. It will probably take you about an hour and a lot of practice to gather the muscle memory or whatever.
rather than a barrier to entry, it's an opportunity
But
to educate.
lowering the entry bar is a step in the wrong direction because it won't make people change their behavior. You will be promoting to do whatever they would like to do and then fix it by squashing it and merging and rewriting the commit message yourself, because probably it does contain a long list of fix X, Y, and Z. So rather create some kind of bot that auto responds to the first contribution someone makes to a project. I know there are some bots out there where you can basically just give a template and they will look up if it's the first contribution, then auto respond, than to promote whatever, well, yeah, what I just said basically.
Okay, fair enough. I only, in my own defense of not appearing to be like willfully ignorant of helping people to, learn. There's a reason why this option was added, and many notable projects are using it. So that's why I brought it up. But I'm also happy. I'm happy with the direction that the maintainers want to go. So. I don't have anything else for that. Does anyone have any? Oh, let me look at the list if other topics were added. Yes, other topics were added.
Yeah, I struggled to find the agenda because I had the wrong link, but I wanted to bring up that I have opened up some Azure documentation and I'm looking for somebody to just review it. It does add a new use cases section to the website. So that's probably the most notable meta structural change. I reused the guides folder though. So I'm happy to change that if we think it should change, but I just followed the same pattern as the migration section. I figured that maybe that was an artifact of putting the migration guides in the guides section and then wanting a separate place for it. But I also considered having a single folder in Git where people can go and look at the documentation as markdown files. So also another contributor opened up a overlapping patch for the SOPs related things at the same time, and it looks like they are willing to collaborate a little. In the same, yeah, does anyone have comments or interest regarding reviewing the Azure stuff? Jonathan, if you're on, I figured you might be interested in this, but.
Yeah, I'll take a look. Seems
Cool.
interesting.
Yeah, if you have additional comments or can think of other Azure services that we should talk about, then please make note. Also, Philip, I think you're an Azure user, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. So I'll try to give some comments.
Yeah, okay. I have noticed that with like very simple docs PRs, that keeping things up to date, even when they're not in conflict, is a bit annoying. I know that we have the Rebase Bot, which is useful. I just wanted to mention that I don't use the Rebase Bot because I've been GPG signing my commits. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on that, but it's just.
Yeah, I can see that. What I tend to do, Lee, is I wait until something's approved and then make sure it's a no-op rebase, if you like, and then push that, wait till it passes, and then merge. And then there's only a smallish window where you can get caught out. But
sweet. So basically, and this is because we have automatic merging on approved PRs that are rebased, right? Is that?
No, we don't. But you can at least keep an eye on CI passing and then on the rebase and then merge it. So you at least get.
Yeah,
like
so what I've been doing is like I've probably checked it 3 times, and then like some of those times I've pinged it in the Flux contrib channel to be like, hey, this thing needs a review, and I just rebase it at that point. But it's just one of those things where it's easy for me to do, but it might catch somebody up who's just trying to. If
the rebase doesn't actually change anything, like doesn't change any of your changes, then I would just leave rebasing until it's approved.
Cool. Sounds good. Sweet. Well, thanks, folks, for promising to look at that Azure Docs PR. I think we have certainly seen the community has struggled, in particular with integrations on Azure. So getting that Docs case up there will be good for those folks, or for that persona of person. And then also, I think it's a good start to documenting the other clouds. I know Allison is working towards this. If you want to help in that area, feel free to comment on the issues. So, also the use cases section, we're thinking this is also where we would have links to our Terraform resources with some extra guidelines and information. There could definitely be a folder structure document there with some examples from the community or something, or just comments on what makes things work. So Vault, any use cases that you can think of that you want to see in there, or if you would like to contribute them, please feel free to add it to that new section that we're considering. Cool. That's it for me.
All right. I think we're at time. So anyone else have thoughts? Please put them. I'll go ahead and copy the template. Or actually, if someone who's doing notes doesn't mind doing that, copying the template for next meeting, and folks can put their agenda items on there anytime between now and then. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks.